Coming up on this episode.
As individuals, we can justify and excuse every decision and every action we ever make because it makes sense to us. That's the way we see the world. But consistent.
Model professionals at all times.
Yeah, you're
Spence.
a consistent sausage. Yeah. A little bit of a funny onion, but you're always a funny onion. Yeah. Okay. There's a level of consistency there. You know what's coming through the door.
Yeah. The most important thing to remember there is there's 8.5 billion people on the planet. Can we fit 8.5 billion people into 72 profiles?
Welcome to the People Performance Podcast. The People Performance Podcast is made up of 3 series. First up, we have the Leader Lounge episodes with founder of T2, Martin Johnson. Then we have the guest interview episodes. And finally, we have our performance episodes delivered by our very own T2 consultants. For now, sit back, tune in and enjoy the People Performance Podcast.
A question we should really ask ourselves, and probably don't as much as we should, is: do we try and do the right thing? The other question that should follow this quite quickly is: do we all do the same thing? And I think we can all agree that probably don't. So if that is the case, then we can't all be right. We can justify, as individuals, we can justify and excuse every decision and every action we ever make because it makes sense to us. That's the way we see the world. That's the way we see life. And you know what? When we look at other people, we tend to judge them by their actions while we still judge ourselves by our intentions. And if we can see, well, we meant to do the right thing, we try to do this, and well, why are you doing that? That doesn't make sense. That can impact on our trust and our understanding of others. This is the People Performance Podcast. I'm Spencer Locker, and today we are joined by Alex Mather, T2 Senior Consultant. How are you doing, Alex? All right?
Spence, not too bad, thank you.
Yeah.
How are you?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yes.
Busy?
Very busy, very busy.
It's that time of year, mate.
Yeah. So we sort of, in that introduction, we start thinking about why we act the way we act, why we lead the way we lead, sometimes why we follow the way we follow.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't question why that is. We just do it as a matter of course because it makes sense to us. But that does mean that actually when we start becoming critical of ourselves, if we look at ourselves from a critical perspective, sometimes we can justify these things. But what is going to help us be a little bit more self-critical? What's going to give us a little bit more, potentially, self-awareness?
It's a good question. And I think that sometimes people struggle with it because of that term critical in it as well. If we're being self-critical, and there's a lot that goes around nowadays about, not being too critical of one another. And I think maybe that sometimes spills out into not being overly critical of ourselves and just trusting ourselves for what we are and that kind of stuff. But it's important to recognise that we're not essentially talking about a critique in that sense. We're more talking about, like you said, self-awareness. And I think the gateway to that, or the way that we should look at that, is under the broader umbrella term of emotional intelligence, really. And certainly emotional intelligence as Dan Goleman defines it. So we talk about self-awareness, as you just mentioned, self-regulation, empathy, motivation, and social skills. And those 5 elements make up sound emotional intelligence. And it's by, I guess, interacting and being conscious of and aware of those 5 elements that we can, look to maybe be a bit more self-critical. But ultimately what you're talking about there is make better choices.
Okay. I'll sort of leaning into, as you were sort of saying about the critical thing. When I say looking at ourselves from a critical perspective, maybe it's not the best word to use. I'm not necessarily suggesting that we should sit down and beat ourselves with sticks because we're being bad and we're doing this wrong. But what I am saying, you might like to beat yourself with sticks, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
personal preference and all.
But I'm sort of saying, rather than saying what am I doing wrong, what could I do better?
Yeah.
What could I index in a little bit more? What is my default because it comes naturally to me, and what is the things that actually might not serve me well, so I need to focus in and lean into it a little bit more.
Yeah. What choices have I got?
Yeah.
And can I make some different ones potentially?
Okay. So rather than, I mean, we're going to talk about psychometrics.
Okay.
Psychometrics.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, again, it's trying to look at. I mean, I know that this is a bit of a Marmite subject. I know there's been a lot of things recently on social media about, are psychometrics any good? Do they serve a purpose? We know that when we've been working with teams and individuals where, oh, you're not going to put me in a box, oh, you're not going to put a name on me, you're not going to give me an identity. And I think fundamentally, we've got to understand that all psychometrics have got a purpose.
Yeah.
I think, personally, the value in psychometrics is how it's delivered.
Yeah.
What is the purpose of it? What are you trying to achieve by using these psychometrics? But there is one particular psychometric model that we use, and well, I'll ask you about it. What are your thoughts about print?
So print. Yeah, look, print is a psychometric, like you say, and it joins an absolute myriad of psychometrics that are available for people to look at and to use. And more common ones that people would have heard of are things like Myers-Briggs, or MBTI as it's also known, DISC, Colour Insights, Belbin. Some real standardized names, I think, that you hear. If you work in organizations and they're doing psychometrics, you're more than likely to come across one of those from time to time. I just want to go back to what you're saying there about the perception of psychometrics, because you bang on. You're absolutely right. There is a lot of people that when they look at psychometrics, when they think about psychometrics, or when they choose to use psychometrics, there's sometimes it can become a little bit of a dangerous playground to be in. Because what I have seen in the past is organisations where they hold an over-reliance on psychometrics, and they use psychometric profiling and psychometric analysis, if you like, and definitions of people to define people entirely. And as a result, they do a couple of things. They make decisions on what a person is going to do, or how they think the person is going to be based on their profile, ignoring any learned behaviour that the person has got, and that therefore limits the person in what they're able to achieve. What I mean by this is, we're not even going to consider that person for this promotion because they are this type of profile. So I've seen that happen. I've also seen the converse of that, where you've got people who are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, that are bang out of order, they're not allowed to do them, and it's detrimental to the rest of the organisation, and it gets brushed under, and people say, oh yeah, but you can expect that kind of behaviour because they're this kind of profile.
Oh, it's like every organisation seems to have a grumpy George.
Yeah.
So when you get brought into the organisation and you're being shown around the facility and you're meeting team members and all that, and then you've got grumpy George who sneers at you, and they turn around and it's okay, that's just George. That's just George. The way he is.
Just how he is. Yeah, that makes it okay then, right?
Yeah.
So that bit's a little bit tricky. There's also the line I like to use, I've used for a number of years when it comes to psychometrics, is one that if you're looking to use a psychometric, you've got to know that psychometrics are not the key to the door. But what they may give you is a bit of a blueprint as to how the door is built. And from there, you might be able to work out how the lock works and how you open the door.
I use something very similar. I'd say it doesn't give you your address, it gives you your postcode.
Love it.
Sort of the area that you're in.
Yeah.
It's up to you to do the address bit.
Yeah.
But,
and there are limitations to psychometrics as well. There's no psychometric that's ever been made which is 100% accurate for a start. And now psychometrics are measured on their validity and how accurate they are. And obviously those that aren't very accurate, aren't very sort of valid, get put in the bin and don't see the light of day. Those ones that you hear about, Print, MBTI, Belbin, they're good tools, but they do different things. And I think we give them a term psychometrics, and as a result, people think that they all do the same thing. But essentially, not all psychometrics are created equal, right? And they do different stuff. So Print, for example, the reason I like Print so much is that it's a motivational model rather than a behavioural modelling tool. So it looks at why you do what you do, not just what you do. There is an element of what you do, but it's centred on the why. So in Print language, it's centred on the triggers for that behaviour happening, and what you identify what happens to you when your unconscious motivators are being met, and what happens when they're not being met, and therefore giving you a why, whereas some of the others will tell you, oh, this is how this person is likely to behave in this situation and in this behaviour. So they're ever so slightly different. But again, back to your point about you're not going to put me in a box. I'm actually a staunch believer in that as well. I think that there are 72 profiles in print. Okay, 72 potential different profiles. MBTI, you get 16 different profile types in MBTI as well. And I think that, or 16 main ones. And I think that the most important thing to remember there is there's 8.5 billion people on the planet. Can we fit 8.5 billion people into 72 profiles? Can everyone be defined by just 72 different profiles? The answer is no. Absolutely not. That would be ridiculous.
It's not even trying that, though.
It's not even close. You think about the size of that number, 8.5 billion. Oh, yeah, but they're all only 72 different types. And so what I like about print is that, yes, you get a profile, and yes, you get some analysis on what that means and how you may behave with certain stuff and what print calls your shadow behaviour is against your best self behaviour. But then you look at specific behaviours individual to you, and you look at specific triggers individual to you. Now, I got curious about this a little while back, and I used AI to run some numbers on what that meant about how many potential profiles there were. So not just on the numeric profile types, but when you include those parameters of different types of behaviours and different types of triggers. And it suggested that it was somewhere in or around the region of 79 trillion different potential profiles.
Right.
Now, that kind of number feels a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
So rather than put people in a box and center them in a certain box of a certain type, it's actually massively individualizing people. And all it does is it helps people to become more aware of themselves, more self-aware, and more aware of what might be going on and why it's going on. And most importantly, what they might be able to do to either stop it or enhance it.
Yeah. So, and from an individual perspective, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
But if in a collaborative perspective from a team, that's incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
Because now you're sitting down with somebody and sort of saying, this is my profile, can I have a look at your profile? And you might sort of say, yeah, okay, this is my profile. Pay particular attention to that trigger there, Spence. Right, okay, fair enough then. Yeah. And it's that awareness, it's building that awareness and knowledge.
It works in team dynamics professionally, but I think that, my wife has quite a unique profile, and when we printed her and she was going through her triggers, I had this dawning realization that I am all of those triggers. I do all of those things on a pretty regular basis. So it's a real good check. And notably, I don't do them as much anymore because I'm conscious that, I want a happy marriage. I want us to, to grow old together, and that's not going to happen if I carry on doing this. So.
Absolutely. I did a similar situation with my wife. I told her all about print, took my profile home, showed it to her. She turned straight to page 6. Yeah. Shadow self, by the way. She turned straight to page 6. Yeah. She's saying, what are these bits that are underlined? I said, don't worry, love. They don't apply to me. She went, really?
Yeah.
I said, yeah, I don't do those. She went, what about that? I said, no, I don't do that. She went, do you remember when we went on holiday to Greece in 2004? I said, yeah. She said, do you remember that thing that happened in the restaurant? I said, yeah. She went, that's that. I said, no, it isn't. She went, yes, it is. Yeah. Because obviously she's got a different unconscious motivators to me. Yeah. So she perceives different things in different ways. Yeah. So as I said before about justifying and excusing every decision and action we ever made, you sort of say to yourself, I did this because of this, because I wanted to. Yeah, but you didn't do that. You actually did this. Your intention was that. Yeah. Well, I meant to do the right thing. But actually, the actual interpretation from other people with other unconscious motivators. And this sort of brings us on to this other part of this podcast really is, yes, we're understanding print profiling, we're understanding how our behaviours impact others. Yeah. But now we're starting to look at psychological safety. So as much as we look at psychological safety, we've got to explore trust. Yeah. Because we mean to do the right thing. But sometimes that doesn't come across. It doesn't translate. It's not interpreted as the right thing. So now we're looking from a leadership perspective. Are you improving psychological safety? Are you growing psychological safety? Are you damaging psychological safety? How is your actions, or how are your actions being interpreted by your people? And what is that doing to either enhance or detract from psychological safety? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, look, psychological safety is a complex topic. It's a complex one too. It's tricky to talk about to some extent. It's tricky in rooms of people as well to help them develop. I think we do a great job of it as T2, but I think because it's so subjective and because it's central based on people, I think that can make it really quite complex. But I think what we can do essentially to enhance psychological safety has all got to come down to awareness of other people. I mentioned emotional intelligence before. If we're going to talk about, let's just take those first three elements. So self-awareness, self-regulation, and empathy. So empathy, essentially, if we want to call that awareness of others, and we align that with self-awareness. So 2 things that we can do to improve psychological safety. Be aware of where you're at with your own emotional state. Okay, what's happening for you in the moment, in the time. Coming back to print, that's really important because that will help you identify if you've been triggered or not, and what that potentially means for some shadow behaviour that might be coming out. Empathy, or awareness of others, is what's going on for these other people as well. What's their print profile? And if you know their print well enough, have I potentially triggered them? That's gold dust then, because you know potentially what to expect from that. But understandably, not everyone has a print profile. It's hard enough to remember all the details of your own one, let alone someone else's. So that can be tricky, but if you've got it, it's great. Essentially, we are intuitive beings. We know when something is off, when someone's not feeling right. We do have a capacity to be able to see and understand how people are feeling just by being close to them and being around them. So empathy in that sense. And then you get to self-regulation. And self-regulation is the piece that's really, really important because that's the choice element. The other 2 bits will just happen. So you can be aware of what's going on, and you might have to, you can make an argument, say, well, it's a choice, to focus in on that. Okay, that's fine. But regardless, it's happening within you. Same for empathy, awareness of others. Like, you're aware of what's going on with others and you have a choice whether to acknowledge it or not, whatever, that's fine. But self-regulation absolutely is a choice aspect. In other words, what are you going to do with that information? So how do I change my behaviour? What choices do I make in terms of moving towards this kind of behaviour compared to that behaviour? What's going to get the best out of this situation or that situation? And if you're trying to build psychological safety and you know what the components of psychological safety are, well, then all your choices should be centered around developing those components. Psychological safety doesn't happen by accident. Most of the time, the major majority of the time, it's intentional, especially in organisations. Psychological safety has to be intentional. You think about the concept of how an organisation works. It's a bunch of random people thrown together to do a random bunch of tasks. So it would be foolish to assume that from the get-go, bringing that bunch of strangers together, that there's going to be psychological safety straight away. There isn't. And so what organisations do and what leaders in organisations do is they get together and they think, right, what can we do? And they may word it slightly differently, but it's what can we do to make this environment better? How do we create a environment that's more conducive to best practice or getting the most out of people, making our people more effective? All of that language is geared towards psychological safety because psychological safety will give you those things. And so the actions that follow that are the choices that those leaders make. But that has to start with self-regulation, looking inwards and deciding how you're going to approach this, and this.
Right. And again, listening to what you've said, I totally agree, by the way. But listening to what you said, we talk about print. One of the things about print is you being your authentic self and understanding that when you're in best self, you're being your authentic self, your unconscious motivators are being met in a positive and productive way. When that is compromised, when you cannot achieve them in a positive, productive way, now you still got to achieve them, but you can't do it in a positive, productive way, so you'll do it in any way you can, which is shadow self. We talk about authenticity, and with the best will in the world, when we talk about empathy, as you said, Daniel Goleman's book, which is an incredible book, by the way, if you get the opportunity to read it, put it on your reading list. If you're not naturally, authentically an empathic person, doesn't mean necessarily that you have no empathy, but you might have low empathy. But when you get to that self-regulation space, it may very well be that I acknowledge that I can't feel what you're feeling, but I acknowledge that it's tough for you. then that actual self-regulation bit is sort of winding up your compassion.
100%.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So, look, I can't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah.
But I understand it's important for you. And leading on from that, it's easier to do when you have small dynamic teams. And if you think about, as you sort of said, alluded to there, random people coming together, well, generally speaking, where at the nucleus, at the birth of something, you've got like-minded people. Doesn't mean to say they've got the same unconscious motivators, but you've got like-minded people who all want to go towards a common goal. Yeah. That's where the team comes together, and that's where the purpose is. Yeah. If they're successful at that, because they have got psychological safety, they're prepared to challenge. They believe that people's intentions are good, even though what they do is different. But then, because they're successful, that team or that organisation will grow. Yeah. And as that grows, now that psychological safety, whilst ultimately we'd like to maintain it and even improve it, we talk about values within an organisation, don't we? That might be a big value in the organisation, but as the organisation grows and gets bigger, that's more difficult to regulate. It's 100%. like a society, because now people are coming in with different unconscious motivators, different points of view, different sense of purpose. Yeah. So again, as you said there, it takes effort. It is a conscious and deliberate thing. Yes. And I think that the whole point of what we're talking about today is about somebody who is in a position of influence within a team, whether you're a supervisor or a team leader or a manager or whatever that looks like. One of the reasons why you're listening to this podcast is because you're making a deliberate choice to improve, to develop, to grow, to have knowledge, to see things from a different perspective, maybe. So deliberate is very, very, very poignant. It's very sort of pertinent. Yeah, okay. So what do you think? Let's say, for the sake of argument, that we've got a team which has a moderate level of psychological safety. Yeah. Moderate to high. Okay. Let's be generous. Yeah. Let's be generous. Moderate to high level of psychological safety. Mm-hmm. So what do you think... Because it's not a given. What do you think could damage a moderate to high level of psychological safety? When we talk about acts and omissions?
Yeah, and I think that is a great question. This is actually an exercise that we do in rooms with people quite a lot as well when we're talking about it. When we talk about an acknowledgement for what the fundamental components of psychological safety are, but then what stops them being psychologically safe, and we get people to note it around the outside. And it depends on the component that you're talking about. It really does depend on which aspect of psychological safety is missing. So, for example, one of the key components might be the ability to discuss mistakes in a group. Now, groups that are highly psychologically safe find discussing mistakes quite easy. There's an environment there where discussing them is a given, talking about them constructively is a given, and the outcomes that come from those discussions ultimately make the organisation better, or make the team or the group better at what they do and how they do it. What decays that element of trust, what stops that element of productive conversation happening, are things like blame culture, for example, or people being penalised for making mistakes,
or avoidance, or not talking about them at all.
Yeah, 100%. And there's a real nice causative link there as well to vulnerability as well, and a lack of willingness from people to be vulnerable. But again, that stems from what people are seeing in the organisation, not just what they're experiencing. Right. And I think that's a huge thing that some leaders miss as well. It's not just what you're doing with your people. Is what your people are seeing all around them as well. Yeah. So when you have leaders that see behaviours going on that aren't conducive to psychological safety, but they sit back and do nothing.
Don't challenge it. Yeah.
Don't challenge. Well, that's not necessarily doing anything to affect the psychological safety between me and that person. But in terms of how psychologically safe they feel in this group, massively damaging.
Absolutely. So it's not necessarily just the things that you do, but it might be the things that you don't do.
Yes.
So effective communication. Again, when we talk about effective communication, in this particular instance, it could be feeding back or actually feeding back to this person, sort of say, look, you know what, you do a really good job. Yeah. This aspect of it, what could we do differently? Yeah. It may very well be that the person who's demonstrating this behaviour has had their psychological safety damaged for some reason, and that's why they're behaving the way that they do.
And so again, we come back to empathy and awareness of others and that kind of stuff, and using that information to make the right choice.
Sure. Again, we talk about communication being the sort of the effective communication being the key to all things, broadly speaking. I know that. But we can consider inconsistency. Inconsistency has been fed back when we've been doing these psychological safety workshops. The inconsistent leader is usually, don't get me wrong, the consistent leader seems to be trustworthy. You do the same, you not necessarily do the same thing, you are the same person. Yeah, you know who's walking through that door every morning. There's a level of consistency. And even if you're consistently grumpy, I was going to use a word about another word maybe, but consistent.
Model professionals at all times.
You were a consistent sausage. A little bit of a funny onion, but you're always a funny onion. Okay. There's a level of consistency there. You know what's coming through the door. Inconsistency is when you're second guessing yourself because you don't know who's walking through that door. Is this person going to be approachable? Can we talk to? Is this person going to be open-minded and truly listen to what I'm going to say, or are they just going to brush me off and sort of go, well, I've been through this situation before, do this, this, and this, without actually listening to the nuance of what my concerns are or what's actually stopping me achieving what I need to achieve. Okay, good stuff. So would it naturally follow that if that can damage psychological safety within a team, within an organisation, what are the things that can enhance psychological safety? I mean, I mentioned consistency. We'll just put that to one side for the time being. But
I think one of the key things that can enhance psychological safety, and in fact, let's lean into what you've just said there about sort of essentially how people show up and how they behave and that kind of thing. And if we take the example of the leader or the boss, if you want, that shows up every day and he walks in and everyone's just watching him as he walks across the car park, or her as she walks across the car park, and is paying particular attention to, just look what's happened there. I can see on the face, this is probably not a good morning. Something's happened. While they've been taking the kids to school or something like that, they come in, face like thunder. They walk briskly towards the desk, and maybe the bag gets thrown down, the laptop comes out, and everyone's like, I'll maybe save that question for this afternoon rather than asking it right away. I think when you've got that volatility, when you've got that inconsistency in terms of how that person is turning up, yes, that can damage psychological safety. But one thing that actually enhances it, and this is not contradictory, I'll explain why, is emotional freedom.
Right.
So people having the freedom and the ability to be able to come into their work environment and to come as their authentic selves with the stuff that goes on in their daily life following in their wake. Because what will destroy psychological safety single-handedly is if you say to people, basically, you got to turn up every day and act like robots, leave your baggage at the door, that kind of stuff. This sort of archaic mentality that we heard in years gone by, where when you go to work, you don't take any of that stuff with you. It's not practical and it doesn't help towards psychological safety. What emotional freedom suggests is that people can come to work and they can have these emotions, but when I go back to this term you used about people being a sausage, this is not an excuse for them to do that. So in an emotionally free environment, what you'll find is that that same leader, that same manager who's had that rubbish morning, that's had that nightmare with the kids or whatever, comes in, face like thunder, annoyed, goes to the desk, puts the stuff down, and then goes to a colleague or says to the team, guys, I'm having a real nightmare morning. This has happened, blah, blah, blah. Someone in the team may then turn around and talk to them about it. Or they might say, do you mind just give me 10, 15 minutes and I'll talk to all of you. I'm just going to take a minute and go out here. I'll come back, whatever. And the other key thing that happens with emotional freedom when everyone has it, because they're psychologically safe, is that kind of conversation happens and there is no judgment from anyone else.
Which leads to vulnerability.
100%.
Which is directly, well, it's part of the trust equation, isn't it?
Of course it is, yeah.
And if you're prepared to be vulnerable, again, you've got. It's not a case of whether you're prepared to be vulnerable, it's who you're prepared to be vulnerable with.
Yes.
I trust you with my vulnerability. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Again, some leaders see vulnerability as a weakness. Again, you mentioned the word archaic, old school. That's the way things used to be. But again, that explanation, that we talked about communication being everything, turning round and saying, you know what, I'm having a bit of a rough time at the moment, and not being judged for it. Again, this is going to lead to psychological safety, because as leaders, we should lead by example. And if we want our people to behave in a certain way, we've got to demonstrate that behaviour so they replicate it. We cause a crowd contagion. So we lead by example. We demonstrate vulnerability in the hope that our people will be vulnerable in return. And again, when people are vulnerable in return, we have this understanding that people behave in a certain way. Well, actually, now I understand about them rather than look at it through my perspective.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, maybe we can reflect on this now.
Let's just come back to our point though quickly, if we may, because I think it's really important that we have this right. That what we're not saying and what we shouldn't expect when we open up this sort of environment where people are free to be vulnerable. I think sometimes people go to the extreme in their mind and they think, oh, well, if we do that, if we create that environment, people are going to be coming into work every day and they're going to be in floods of tears and they're going to be flipping tables and throwing chairs and there's going to be rows and all that, and it's going to be too rowdy and all that kind of stuff. The fact is, groups of people, generally speaking, don't behave like that en masse. And that's not because they're protecting themselves. It's just that when people are psychologically safe and they're happy, they're generally pretty stable people. It's only when significant things happen that their behaviours change. So that environment won't go off in the first instance. And also, there's also a balance to it as well. Because what we're not saying is that you made a great point a second ago where you said, who can you be vulnerable to? It's not about being vulnerable to everyone. If you go to every single person that you work with, that you're connected to, and all your stakeholders and everything, and you're completely vulnerable to them, and you tell them about the terrible morning you've had, or the mistake that you made last week that cost the company 10 grand, something along those lines. Well, then you're going to run into some issues, right? So you've got to know where the vulnerability points are within your organisation. But absolutely, it has to exist within your own team, you included, if you want to build a team that's psychologically safe.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So on reflection, we've got to start asking ourselves, what are we doing that our team see that we're not aware of? How are we getting self-aware? What are we looking at? What can help us become a little bit more self-aware? We talked about print and psychometric profiling, but that all leads towards, you know what? If this is me and this is you, how are we going to be able to maximise this? How are we going to be able to build trust and psychological safety? Very, very important, and I think there's a lot to reflect on there. But our time is up, I'm afraid, Alex. So thank you very much for coming in, giving us the benefit of your experience and knowledge.
No worries.
And that's it for this episode of the People Performance Podcast. So thank you very much, and goodbye now.
The People Performance Podcast, brought to you by T2.